Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, tonight's live stream is called Who is the Real Terrorist, Hamas or Israel? And obviously there are two very divided camps regarding that. And for the record, the Zionist Anti-Defamation League were invited to join the discussion tonight several days ago, but didn't even respond to our invitation. I'm going to start this live stream with 3 short video clips. The first is unpacking the Israeli military's Palestine laboratory. You heard me right. Another, from last night's news here in Australia, the recent demand by Israel that over 1 million Palestinians leave North Gaza within 24 hours or face death. You heard me right. They have been told that they will die if they stay in North Gaza. Finally, a clip showing the only road out of North Gaza blocked and not moving. Can you imagine the trauma facing families with children in Gaza right now? Let's start off with the first video clip. Here we go.
According to the UN, though a ceasefire agreement was reached after 5 days of violence, there's no indication of any end in sight for the conflict in Gaza. Because the thing is, sadly, frustratingly, this is not a new story. As UN records show, there was the 2021 Gaza conflict that killed 261 Palestinians and 13 Israelis. The 2018 Gaza March of Return that claimed 214 Palestinian lives and 1 Israeli soldier. The 2014 Gaza war, dubbed by Israel as Operation Protective Edge, that killed 2,251 Palestinians and 73 Israelis. The 2012 Gaza war, known as Operation Pillar of Defense, that killed 168 Palestinians and 4 Israelis. And the devastating 2009 Gaza war, or Operation Cast Lead, that left 1,385 Palestinians and 4 Israelis dead. You get the drift here. It's a seemingly never-ending chain of violence and chaos in which Palestinians bear the brunt of the casualties. Israel, of course, tries to frame it all as a war against terrorism, while Palestinians say it's really about racism and colonialism and occupation. But what if it's about something else as well? Good old-fashioned capitalism. That's what journalist and author Anthony Lowenstein provocatively argues in his new book, The Palestine Laboratory, how Israel exports the technology of occupation around the world. See, Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories has been going on since 1967, and its clash with the Arabs since 1948. But after 9/11, the conflict in the region took a new turn as Israel positioned itself as a key ally in the global war on terror. And as Lowenstein writes of the Israeli strategy, the message was unambiguous. We have been fighting a war on terror since our birth. We'll show you how it's done. And that they did, because as Lowenstein writes, Israel has developed a world-class weapons industry with equipment conveniently tested on occupied Palestinians, then marketed as battle-tested. Cashing in on the IDF brand has successfully led to Israeli security companies being some of the most successful in the world. The Palestine Laboratory is a signature Israeli selling point. The Palestine Laboratory, he calls it. Lowenstein even details an Israeli defense company using actual footage of their drones striking in Gaza in their promotional video. A strike that may have, as global arms trade expert Andrew Feinstein told him, turned out to have killed civilians, including kids. But hey, it's a strategy that has bolstered the Israeli economy, as Israel's defense industry is now one of its leading export businesses. In 2021 alone, the Israeli Defense Ministry reported arms sales were the highest on record, totaling $11.3 billion, a $3 billion jump from the year prior. And Israel sat on a list of the world's top 10 biggest exporters of major weapons between 2018 and 2022. Here's the thing, the benefits to Israel of a never-ending war on Gaza are actually twofold. Not only does the Strip serve as a testing ground and key selling point for Israeli weaponry, but the nations that purchase these weapons are then more likely to turn a blind eye to any abuses committed by Israel. As Lowenstein writes, Israel has sold so much defense equipment to so many nations that it hopes to insulate itself from any political backlash to its endless occupation. As long as the world's richest countries keep buying its weapons, Israel is unlikely to face any real political consequences for its illegal occupation of Palestinian territories. And there's certainly no financial incentive for Israel to end its almost year-in, year-out violence against the people of Gaza, because quite simply and quite clearly, it would be bad for business.
The United Nations has described the situation in Gaza as thousands of civilians flee their homes following an ultimatum from Israel. The Israeli Defense Force warned they had 24 hours to relocate if they wanted to live, a demand human rights groups have labelled a war crime.
A warning message arriving from the sky. The Israeli military dropped leaflets over northern Gaza, telling civilians to flee south within 24 hours if they want to live. 1.1 million people told to get out with only one main road to evacuate. They pack their belongings but don't know where or how to live.
The problem is there is no enough cars.
Many have also run out of petrol, fuel cut off under Israel's blockade.
Okay, secure the road towards Salahuddin and we will go. But you can't take 10 or 15 members of your family on an unsafe route.
Desperate families deciding to walk, young children carrying bags. Nearly half of the Strip's population is under 18.
It happened to our grandfathers, said Mohammed Roca. Now it's happening to us. It raises the ghosts of the past.
Close to 1 million Palestinians were forced to flee their homes during the 1948 war that led to the foundation of Israel. Aid groups appalled by the order.
Under humanitarian law, it's called forcible transfer of populations, and it's a war crime.
Hamas told residents to ignore it and stay put.
Hamas continues to use innocent civilians as human shields and is reportedly blocking roads to prevent Palestinians from moving to southern Gaza.
Leaving isn't an option for everyone.
It is impossible to evacuate vulnerable hospital patients from the north of Gaza.
Doctors Without Borders revealing one hospital has been given just 2 hours to evacuate. North or south, disaster is everywhere. Paramedics are overwhelmed.
We're descending to a depth of darkness I simply haven't seen.
The UN has urged Israel to withdraw the 24-hour ultimatum.
We never set a time frame. We understand it will take time. I know that from tomorrow the world is going to call us war criminals again.
As the deadline loomed, the Israeli military revealed localised raids had been carried out in Gaza over the past day, with the aim to locate rocket crews and hostages. Hamas releasing these chilling videos shortly after, claiming to show militants taking care of Israeli child hostages.
Bismillah. Yalla drink.
A taunt. The Israeli Prime Minister giving a rare Shabbat address to the nation.
I emphasize, it's just the beginning. Our enemies have just begun to pay the price.
All retaliation for the biggest attack in Israel's history. Defense still grappling with how it happened.
Okay, so, final clip. What you just saw there is that road, the only road out of North Gaza, and you can see it's completely blocked. And you heard what Netanyahu had to say. This is a horrifying situation for the citizens of Gaza. Just for the record, there are 2 links below this video, should you want to find out more. The first one is Uprooting the Causes of Violence in Gaza and Israel, and that document or that article or that paper was actually produced on the 10th of October this year, so it's very relevant. And the second one is a timeline of the Israeli-Palestine conflict in 2023, this year. And if you have a look at that, you'll see almost every day Palestinians are killed by Israelis. This is not some random situation. This is pretty well every day. Please remember to register on lovinglifetv.com to be kept informed. I'm going to get our guests on now, which is Yusuf Ismail and Enver Masud. And here we go. I'll get Yusuf on first. Hi, Yusuf.
Hello, good evening again, Scott. Good evening, day 2. How are you doing?
Excellent. Good to see you. Let me just get Enver on.
Okay, sure.
It won't be a second. Okay, I played those little clips regarding the forced, well, the citizens being told to leave North Gaza, and also showing how blocked the road is.
Hello.
Hi, Enver.
Hi, I see you. I can't see Scott, but he told me there's some reason why we don't.
Yeah, because my camera's taken by my streaming software.
And do you see me? I don't see what I look like at your end.
No,
like
we
you
just... You need to turn your camera on.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Camera's off.
There we go. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right.
I'm going to start off the live stream tonight asking Yusuf to give us a very brief background to the conflict in Gaza. Last night's live stream basically went into that in great detail, but just for those who didn't see last night's, would you like to just give us some background there, Yusuf?
Yeah, just a quick background, maybe 3 to 4 minutes at the most. Basically, what you have is the situation is that Israel was bombed into existence in 1948. Close to 1 million Palestinians, that's Christians and Muslims, refugees that had to flee. We heard yesterday and we discussed that Jewish terrorist outfits such as the Irgun and the Stern gang raped and massacred the population. You had the Deir Yassin massacre, the bombing of the King David Hotel, and of course the apartheid system in place. And what happened is that these two strips, the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which is where the Palestinians are predominantly staying, the 1948 Israeli war, when Israel was bombed into existence, created the refugee crisis. The Palestinians were forced to flee. And you could probably just put the sound off, so because I'm getting a possible echo. Okay. And then when you speak, you can put the sound on again. So I apologize for that. Yeah. So basically, in the 1948 Israeli war, when Israel was bombed into existence, the Palestinians were forced to flee. And they fled. So they fled to the area which is known as the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The Gaza Strip back then was under Egyptian-administered territory. Then you had the 1967 war. After the 1967 war, that territory, which is known as the Gaza Strip, was occupied by the Israelis. The Israeli soldiers went in, they established settlements, Israeli soldiers controlled it. And then in the 1990s, as part of the Oslo Accords, they then claimed to have given that away to the Palestinian National Authority, but only in superficially, because Israeli settlements continued to be and exist in the Gaza Strip in good condition, a long time, the squalor that the Palestinians were living in. And then, of course, in 2005, they claimed that there was a Palestinian legislative election and Hamas won. But what then happened is that Israel then imposed a complete siege, a land sea blockade, and it devastated the entire economy. And so most of those descendants in Gaza, the Gaza Strip, they are descendants of the refugees who had fled from the area, which is now known as Israel, and they had expelled from that area after the 1948 war. The West Bank, on the other hand, the West Bank where the Palestinians also stay, that was basically after the 1948 war. It was annexed by Jordan in 1950, but after the 1967 war, it was captured and reoccupied by Israel during the Six-Day War. And it's been under Israeli military occupation ever since. And they call it as part of they administer the West Bank, which excludes East Jerusalem as Judea and Samaria. And of course, so these are the so-called occupied territories. Now, just one point, because I'm going to wrap this up quickly. The claim, I think, made by one of the viewers yesterday, Palestine, as it stands now, has not been under, and when I speak about Jewish autonomy, I'm talking about the traditional Jewish, Sephardic Jewish autonomy, for at least approximately 4,000 years. Let's get that clear. The Arabs never took the land from the Jews. They took it from the Romans, the Byzantines. You, for example, had in about 1000 BC, the Persians were in rule. Then in 300 BC, you had the Hellenistic and the Hasmonean era, which is the period of Alexander the Great. From about 64 BC, before Christ, you had the Roman period, which was divided into the early Roman period, the late Roman period, and the Byzantine period, which is the East Roman Empire. And so it was the Arabs that took over from the Byzantines. The Byzantines were the East Roman Empire, and they were in control. They were in autonomous control. So Jews lived there, no doubt. And they did live even before the establishment of the State of Israel. But they were not in autonomous control of Jerusalem or that area known as Palestine or now known as Israel for close to 4,000 years. Now, the problem we've got here, which is the main issue, is that the Jews that basically want to go there and claim birth of Israel are not the Jews that come from that particular area. They are Ashkenazi Jews, meaning that they are Jews that descend from Jews who lived in Central or Eastern Europe. They originally were not Jewish, but they come from the Khazar region. I think Arthur Koestler in his book, The History, and Shlomo Sand in the book, The Invention of the Jewish People, mentions the idea that, Jews who settled in the 10th century in Rhineland in Western Germany, they were actually converts to Judaism, not indigenous Jerusalem. And so it's these Polish, Germans, French, Russian, European, Central European Jews that are claiming a birthright to Israel. So in conclusion on this particular point, Israel is basically now as it exists, is an apartheid state. It discriminates against its own Jewish civilian population. The Sephardic Jews and the Ethiopian Jews are discriminated against. It discriminates against Palestinian Christians. It discriminates against Palestinian Muslims. It was formed through a massacre. Land is regularly taken by ultra-Orthodox settlers on the West Bank in accordance with the law of return. Any American, if you're American, you're right up there. You're number one. Any British, any French, any Russian Jew can get Israeli citizenship. But actual refugees from the land of origin have no right. And if they enter Israel, these Palestinians, where their forefathers lived, and they set up house or set up shop, they will be arrested. There are regular rocket attacks from Israel into Gaza and the West Bank over the past 10 years. You played an excellent clip by the journalist Mahdi Hassan on MSNBC, which was remarkably shown, where there's a disproportionate number of violence. These so-called, there are no, and I want to know the viewers that they need to know, there are no two sides of the story. There's only one side of the story. And that one particular side is you've got a belligerent regime, which is part and parcel of the New World Order, that is out and engaging in a kind of fascist persecution against the indigenous Palestinian population. And that's the reality of the situation. And so we'll obviously, Enver and yourself will unpack that even, for example, Hamas's involvement. Hamas, by the way, was created by Mossad and the Israeli intelligence, and they were created in the early 80s as a response to the more secular Palestinian Liberation Organization and the George Habash's Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which was a Marxist organization. They were set up as a means to create internal division within the Palestinian population, but it backfired against them. And then, of course, they then acquired this kind of military turn, which basically happened in the 1990s. So Hamas was created by Israel directly and indirectly, and they eventually turned against the state of Israel. And whether you can see it as resistance, legitimately so, or, for example, a false flag, it's quite clear that we are now being faced with a whole lot of propaganda through the fake news. But that must not take away us from the bottom issue, is that this is a state which is genocidal in nature, that is formed through genocide, that survived through the commitment of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, and that is now on the brink of committing mass genocide in Gaza that we see at this particular point in time. And this is what the mainstream media and the fake news out there is not basically showing. So that's a kind of a summary of the situation at this particular point in time. Thank you.
Now, just a comment that came through I'd like you to respond to, Yusuf.
Yeah.
And that is, just before that time, the Arabs, Muslims were ethnic cleansing all Jews and Christians from their land.
Yeah, that's totally false. I mean, you look at the entire the position in the state which is now known as Israel from about the time of the 1917 period, when you had the immigration that took place by Jews, Sephardic Jews, European Jews that basically entered the land of Palestine, lived side by side. The problem started, and these people know, is that you go onto Google and type in this particular group, Irgun, Stern, Lehi. It's when these paramilitary Zionist terrorist organizations that were nominally Jewish, but claimed to be Jewish, and used religion as a basis for appropriating the land of Palestine, when they started engaging in acts of violence against the population, you then had a situation where these Arab armies then basically started jumping in and attacking the setting up of the state of Israel. But eventually what happened is that they created a mass refugee crisis because the existing population of close to 750,000 to 1 million Palestinians were basically eradicated now, and they had become refugees. So if they were engaged in ethnic cleansing, how is it that those same people that were engaged in ethnic cleansing became refugees in their own particular land? The Germans were engaging in the Nazi Holocaust. Did the Germans suddenly become refugees against the Jewish nation? Doesn't make sense. So if you look at the actual situation, when you look at bombings like the bombing of the King David Hotel, or for example, when you look at the Jerusalem massacre or the Deir Yassin massacre, where Palestinian, Christian and Muslim women were raped, babies were massacred, and people had their throats slit. These are not individuals that were basically engaging in ethnic cleansing against Jews. This is a false propagandist lie that the Zionists would basically want people to believe. And it's quite ironical that it's only recently that these lies basically come up, because initially, leading up to the creation of the State of Israel, the criticism was basically leveled against European society. It was the Europeans that were viewed as anti-Semitic, and so they wanted to look for a homeland for the Jewish people. And as I mentioned yesterday, the Zionists initially had places like Argentina and Uganda as potential Jewish homelands that they were looking for. Now, I'm saying that if they were so religiously minded, why were they considering places like Uganda and Argentina in the first place? These were not religious people. These were not religiously minded Jews. Theodor Herzl, who wrote the book Der Judenstaat, was not a religiously minded Jew. He was a secularist. A lot of the Zionist federations in Europe, they were nominally Jewish, but they were secular in nature. Those people like Karl Marx and a lot of these individuals that were involved in the development of communism were Jewish, but they were Jewish only nominally. So this is a false charade that is being put out. What is quite clear is that you see ethnic cleansing, and this has been recognized by Israeli academics and Israeli scholars. Ilan Pape, in the link you're going to put down, he's written an excellent book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Dr. Yuri Davis, Norman Finkelstein, he's the descendant of Nazi survivors in the Holocaust. Noam Chomsky, as an example. All these are Jewish writers and academics. Dr. Yuri Davis, he's written a book called Israel and Apartheid State. They are speaking out against what is basically happening. And what we're talking about is the Israeli regime. It's a regime that is in power. It's not the people. Of course, the Israeli people have to stay there. What we are calling for, myself and I assume Enver, is a total disbandment of the state of Israel. The Knesset and people like Netanyahu and his gang have to go to either the guillotine or life imprisonment. And Israelis and Palestinians have to come together and create a single nation state. Call it what you want to. Call it Palestine, call it Holy Land, call it what you want to. But the state of Israel, as an apartheid state, as it exists today, cannot continue to exist. It has to be disbanded. Otherwise, you're going to have the situation for 75 years. What change has there been? Yeah. And the oppressors, the oppressed and the victims, they are turned and made into the oppressors, which is an absolute shame. That's the background behind the whole story.
Okay, now look, I just want to address the side chat. There are a couple of people there saying that this is very one-sided. I just want to again reaffirm that the Zionist Anti-Defamation League were invited to participate in this discussion, and they didn't even respond. I mean, we approached them. We said, we're going to have this discussion. Come and give your side of the story. And they obviously thought that it wasn't important enough, so they didn't bother to even respond.
Scott, Scott, could I just make a point just to assist you? You saw the emails
Yes.
We sent an email to the Zionist Federation. We sent an email to the DA. We sent an email to Gayton McKenzie. I sent an email to the Jewish Board of Deputies. We invited them to Loving Life TV. We invited the best of the Rabbi Warren Goldstein to come on board, have a discussion with us. Not a debate, come and have a discussion. Why is it that nobody is willing to come across and speak to us? I even sent an email to Robert Spencer from the United States, who is a pro-Zionist propagandist, doesn't want to come and debate. So either you are afraid to come and talk, you're not going to have a debate, you're afraid of Scott, you're afraid of me, you're afraid of Enver, or you're afraid of the truth. One of the two things.
Right. Now, Enver, I'm going to turn to you. You're an expert in certain areas related to what's happening in Gaza. And one of those is the causes of violence in Gaza. Do you want to take us through what is causing the violence in Gaza?
I'll answer that with first, what is the legal right of Palestinians to resist Israeli occupation? Under international law, Gaza, much of Israel, what is now Israel, is occupied territory. I don't think there's any debate about that in the UN.
Right.
And an occupied people have the legal right to resist by any means. That is a right. Now, in Islam, one would temper that with what is called just war, which is very similar in Christianity and Islam. In just war, you do not attack civilians. You do not attack their sources of food or water. You only attack the military. So that is just war. So either Israel adheres to the concept of just war, and they are a legitimate target under the occupying military is a legitimate target. Now let's see what is the occupying military. Until recently, all Israeli citizens, other than the religious minority, had to go into military service. They then went into reserve status. So the civilian on the street that you might see could be a reservist. Now that has declined over the years because Israelis started resisting military service. And after a while, it got so bad that I understand the Israeli military stopped trying to capture them and prosecute them and take them to task. So I think the very important part of this whole discussion is what is the legal right of the Palestinians to resist occupation? And you don't have to trust me. Check out the law from whatever your trusted law sources are and go by that. The second, was the attack unprovoked? The Gazans have nothing but provocation for 20, 30 years or more. Their homes are destroyed. They're bulldozed. They are surrounded by settlers, and slowly their whole community has been chipped away, so that from being a contiguous piece of land in 1946, where the Palestinians occupied virtually all of what is today Israel, are now in a small strip called Gaza, which is about, I believe, about 25 miles long and 4 to 7 miles wide. And there are more than 2 million people crammed in there. And many of them have never even seen the West Bank because they're not allowed out of Gaza even to see the rest of the Palestinian territories or the West Bank where their holy sites are. So it's the question, they're young people. I think the unemployment rate is 40% or something. The poverty rate is incredible.
It's over 50%.
Yeah. So, there's ample provocation.
Yeah.
So then I get to the utter hypocrisy of all this. When we have Western media describing the situation, they keep talking about whether it's Yugoslavia or China or Iraq or Iran or Israel, Palestine. They keep talking about the rules-based order. and how the U.S. maintained the rules-based order, and now it's slipping away because of rising powers around the world, China, Iran. That is utter hypocrisy. The U.S. itself is the biggest violator of the rules-based order. If you get, there's a report put out by the Congressional Research Service. It's called Instances of Use of United States Armed Forces, 1798 to 220. That's more than 220 years of the U.S. use of armed forces. Every single year, the U.S. has been in war somewhere or the other. Perhaps a very small minority of these were justifiable wars, but mostly they were wars to spread democracy. What democracy? They're not interested in spreading democracy. They're only interested in spreading their power and enriching the pockets of the military industrial complex, of which our own congressmen and senators are also guilty. They buy into those wars. They know they're about to happen. They buy stock in those defense companies. So, this is sort of the bigger picture. I am not an expert on the details and history of Israel and Palestine, but I think when you get to these bigger questions, you see the utter nonsense that is being told by the other side. But lately, I'm a little bit encouraged. Just today, I was reading an article in NBC, which is one of our mainstream news sources, which seems pretty balanced, but I have a feeling they'll put it out once, then they won't repeat it. And that way they sort of cover their backs by saying, well, we did write about it. So, and to answer your question, why these Jewish organizations won't have Yusuf Ismail on, it's the same reason they won't debate me about 9/11. They don't want to give me the platform. As long as they're alone on the platform, they can say whatever they want to. They don't want anybody else contradicting them, right or wrong. So they just want to deny you the platform. That's why they don't come on.
Isn't it also because they have the ear of the fake mainstream media? They just have to pick up the phone to CNN or MSNBC or Australian Broadcasting Corporation and bang, they're live on television. Whereas if you're from the other side, you got no chance.
Exactly. And our mainstream in the U.S., that is mainstream news media, is nothing more than an echo chamber for the State Department. Whether it is Libya or Iraq or Afghanistan, Niger, they are mostly an echo chamber for the State Department. Was it Afghanistan, Iraq, I believe, they went in embedded with U.S. troops. They only saw what the U.S. troops saw. And if I can point to so many areas where the reporting was totally in error. I remember one when they were showing the destruction of Libya and the killing of Gaddafi. They showed what was purported to be the people of Libya demonstrating against Libyan rule. And what they were showing were Indians. I recognize Indians. I'm from India. They had the Indian flag. The Libyan faces look very different than Indian faces to me, if you're at all familiar with them. And they go to any lengths to do that. The marvel of engineering that Gaddafi was building, the tunnels that brought water from the aquifers in the desert to the coastal cities, that is one of I think it's been called the 9th or 8th of some wonder of the world. The U.S. claimed those were hiding weapons of mass destruction. I mean, the lies, there's no end to it. There's no shame in this media, because most people don't take the time to research the facts. And today people are so tied up with their social media, very few people read the newspapers or do the research. So it's easy to fool this kind of crowd. Perhaps I've taken too much of your time.
No, that's great, Enver. Thank you. Now look, to me, the elephant in the room is quite simple. Israel could have stopped the conflict from happening. They knew it was coming. Egypt told the Israeli government days before the 7th of October, that there was an anticipated attack by Hamas on Israel from Gaza. And what did Netanyahu do? He moved 80% of his military that's the Israeli Defense Force, from the border facing Gaza, moved them to the West Bank. He knew that an attack was imminent, and he removed his army. Now, what was the objective for him to make that border so vulnerable to Hamas terrorists to come through? I mean, that is the elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned. And I think we're now seeing what it is, and that is the complete destruction of the Gaza Strip with the blessing of the United States and Blinken. I'm going to put this question to Yusuf first. Yusuf, what's your view on why this was allowed to happen? Because clearly the Israelis could have stopped it happening if they had acted on the information given to them by Egypt. And let's face it, Mossad is not just some amateurish intelligence outfit. They would have had people embedded in Hamas who would have been telling them exactly what was planned. And yet they just let it happen. Why?
Yeah, look, just to background, and it's quite obvious, we touched a bit on this yesterday. I don't know what Enver's position is on the idea of false flag operation, but he's certainly an expert in the aspect of 9/11, which is the ultimate in false flag. And quite strangely enough, this is being described by the Israeli, and that's the cynicism of the whole thing, as Israel's 9/11. What had basically happened is that there was a U.S. congressional panel chairman, I think the House of Representatives Foreign Affairs Committee. He had apparently told reporters of the alleged warning. And the idea was that Israel was warned by Egypt. And when we're talking about Israel, we're talking about the Israeli intelligence was warned by Israel of potential violence 3 days before Hamas's crossing or the actual flying into that particular area. And what you have is a situation is that Israel is declaring that this is one of the deadliest attacks ever in its 75-year history and 50 years, I think, to the date of the Yom Kippur War.
Well,
but
sorry, Yusuf. The comment by Netanyahu was that this is the second worst attack against the Jews since the Holocaust. That's from him personally.
Yeah. Stated that he doesn't want to get too much into the classified information, but a warning was given at length. And I think his only gripe was the aspect at what particular level this happens. Now, when you look at false flag operations in general, and I'm not saying, and I don't know for sure whether this is indeed a false flag operation as such, but false flag operations are when you basically create something. It's like the typical Hegelian dialectic, the problem, reaction, solution. You create a problem, you get a reaction from the population, which is a fear, and then that is a state apparatus that has created the problem, then provides a solution. If you look at Israel's history, there is something which people need to know, something which is called the Lavon affair. Those who want to type up, just go onto Google and type in what is the Lavon affair. The Lavon affair was in fact a failed Israeli covert operation. It was, I think, codenamed Operation Susanna. And that was basically conducted in Egypt in 1954 as part of the false flag operation, Operation Susanna, the Lavon affair. What you had was that a group of Egyptian Jews were recruited by the Mossad, by Israeli military intelligence, to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets, that is cinemas, libraries, and American educational centers. And the bombs were supposed to be timed to detonate several hours after the closing time. When the bombs went off and when as many people were killed, the attacks were then going to be blamed by Israel onto the Muslim Brotherhood and onto Egyptian communists. And that would be the basis which would hopefully lead to possible Israeli invasion into Egypt, and of course, which would basically induce the British government to retain its occupying troops in Egypt's Suez Canal zone. Now, obviously, the operation never happened, but the actual operation, the person who became known as the Lavon affair, it's named after the Israeli Defense Minister Pinhas Lavon, who was forced to resign as a consequence of that particular instance, but after it was discovered. But beyond that, there's been many false flag operations committed by Israel, and the world basically knows about this. For example, just recently, and I'm talking about recently 20 years ago, during the heights of 9/11, if you look at the archives of American intelligence services, particularly during the years of 9/11 and George W. Bush's administration, they describe, for example, how Israeli Mossad agents, they recruited operatives belonging to a terrorist group called Jandallah, and they were passing themselves off as American agents. And according to the U.S. intelligence officials, the Israelis were given American dollars, they were given U.S. passports, they posed as CIA officers recruiting the so-called operatives in what is known as a false flag operation. And what this memo basically goes on to show, check this memo in 2007, Jandallah and the Mossad. And essentially, according to the U.S. government, this organization, which was basically recruited by Mossad and set up by Mossad, was responsible for assassinating Iranian women and children, and of course, government officials. So there's nothing, if you think of an organization, a small little organization like Hamas, which to a certain extent, they are legitimate people. I met some of them that they came to the University of KwaZulu-Natal, some of the representatives years ago. A lot of them are decent folk. And we begin to think how easy it would be for in the very heart of the devil that they could easily have Mossad agents infiltrating Hamas and having a situation in terms of which when Hamas entered Israel, when they entered this land, when they came down, amazingly enough, in paragliders and parachutes, where was the Israeli police? Where was the Israeli apparatus, support apparatus? And you know what? I saw an interview recently, a couple of days ago, where one of the ex-Israeli Defense Force members stated that even if a cockroach were to cross from the borders or Gaza, or a bird were to fly over, it would be detected on the radar of the Israeli security apparatus. And quite strangely, on the scene itself, on the very scene itself, and this music concert which happened, basically, it was moved within 48 hours from the place where it was originally supposed to have taken place. I think it was at one particular area, and after about 48 hours, it was moved to another area. But that place was devoid. There was no Israeli police, no Israeli security, no Israeli Defense Force, nothing. Where were they? Were they caught napping? Was it just purely an accident? How is it that you have a situation that the borders leading to Gaza and obviously on the West Bank, and these are the most patrolled in the world, and you've got an intelligence agency like Mossad, these people could basically come and be listening to our live stream. They could target and kill you, Scott, and they could come and kill me, and they could identify where our houses are and where we stay in the middle of South Africa or Africa, you in Australia, or Enver Masud in Washington, D.C., where is he based. They could pick up anyone on the radar. They could be listening into this live stream, and yet they don't know what's happening. When a major organization, which they deem and they describe, and I would say with some reservations, they call it a terrorist organization, although who the real terrorist is, it's quite clear in light of the genocide. They don't know what's going on. So how is it possible that these, rocket barrages against Israel is one thing, but when you've got a vehicle transported incursion and you've got people parachuting and all of them coming like MacGyver, if you saw the program MacGyver on hang gliders into Israel, and nobody's there. And then Netanyahu says he's got the audacity to say, no, we didn't know anything. We didn't know anything. They can kill people if you stay in Alaska. Mossad has the ability to target you and kill you if you're staying a far field in Alaska or in Fiji or in Western Samoa. But they don't know what's going on the very border. And so what basically, and then what happened, which is quite interesting enough, you then had the story about babies being beheaded. This is totally false. It never happened. There was a news report which is now exposed that even members of the IDF have mentioned that this is a total false report. There was no beheading of babies, these 40 babies that they were talking about. And if you go back further, and I sent you an article, the beheading of babies...
Hang on,
yes.
Yusuf. What about the allegation that babies were burnt alive?
It was totally false. I urge viewers to look at this report on Sky News, whereby one of the interviewees on the Sky News Australia pointed out that the IDF, and in fact certain individuals within the IDF, have made mention of the fact that these reports emanated from a single journalist, and that particular journalist, she tweeted on a stream basically to suggest that, look, she's hearing reports of babies being beheaded and babies being burnt. Of course, people were shot. That's unfortunate. And those
well,
were
I actually, sorry, Yusuf, I actually know the source of that allegation, and I put a video up a few days ago with all the information there, and it was one Israeli deputy commander who was actually involved in basically clearing out Palestinian villages for settler occupation. In other words, they were kicking the Palestinians off their land. He was very much a radical, and he was the guy who claimed that he had seen beheaded babies. And I heard that interview, which the reporter who actually reported what he said, which then went global and was taken as fact, she actually said a few hours later in a tweet that she retracted the information, and other reporters who were there actually also tweeted, and again, this is in my earlier videos, which you can go check it out for yourself. They said this is bullshit. They said they were there, they were at that kibbutz, they spoke to all the Israeli soldiers, and none of them said anything about beheading of babies or murdering of 40 babies. So this was complete propaganda and Netanyahu and Joe Biden suggested the same thing. So it just clearly shows this has been used to create sympathy for this feral Israeli government in Israel.
But the thing about this, Scott, is that when you create the picture of babies being beheaded and burnt and women being raped, obviously you're going to garner sympathy. But I sent you a link on the Naira testimony. The Naira testimony was a testimony by a 15-year-old girl in October 1990, if you recall. She had given a testimony before the United States Congressional Human Rights Caucus. And she was speaking about the fact, and this was just leading up to the Gulf War, that Kuwaiti babies were being picked up and killed and being beheaded by Iraqi soldiers, and they were being taken out from the incubators from the Kuwaiti hospital, and they were left on the floor to die. And then George Herbert Walker Bush, the father of George W. Bush, he basically went and on the global, the famous news, he's saying, oh, Iraqi soldiers are taking Kuwaiti babies, they're beheading them and throwing them on the floor. And that basically led to the invasion of the Iraqi invasion, the first Gulf War, claiming, and one of the reasons for the first Gulf War, over and above the fact, is his atrocities. So when you create a picture of atrocities, and right now, even though the source, as you mentioned rightly, has retracted from the beheading of the baby stories, which is total bullshit, the mainstream media is still putting that out, just like they did during the time of COVID. Oh, the vaccinations are safe and all of that. They're doing the same thing now. The BBC, the Times of London, the bullshit CNN, all these particular news outlets, Fox News, and some of these sick individuals out there like Bill Maher and Ben Shapiro and all these swines, propagandists of the worst kind, who don't give a damn about dying children in the first place. They are still perpetuating the same falsehood. So the source of the falsehood has now come across and retracted it. But since, they say you can tell so much of lies, there's a saying about saying so much of lies, and the more and more you repeat a lie, the more and more people will believe it.
Yeah.
And that's basically served their aim. So now you've got beheading of babies, raping of women, burning of babies. Oh, that's a good justification. Israel now is given full reign to commit genocide because, look, babies were beheaded. And that's basically what they're doing. And it leads up now to the 1 million or 2 million Gazan citizens or Gazan refugees that are forced to leave their place in 24 hours on a narrow strip of road.
Yeah.
This is basically what the Nazis did to the Jews in Germany, or allegedly did, is exactly what Israel is setting up to Palestinians. And these are Palestinian, not Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians as well. So those Christian evangelists out there who are supporting Israel think, because churches are being destroyed, Palestinian children and Christians are also being killed, we need to stand up in solidarity with them. It's not a religious thing of Muslim versus Jew, Muslim versus Christian. This is a human rights violation, a war crime, an atrocity. And over and above that, white phosphorus is being thrown on the Gazans. White phosphorus is similar to depleted uranium. It's a weapon of mass destruction. Israel is the only nation in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons, that has used nuclear weapons, that is basically now putting white phosphorus, throwing them on the civilians of Gaza. Nobody's talking about that. This is all acceptable. This is the response that they are allegedly talking about.
Right. Now, look, don't you think that what's happening in Gaza right now basically takes away the... it's almost like a Teflon coating argument. When you raise something against Israel, they say, oh, you're anti-Semitic, what about the Holocaust? Now, what they're doing right now in Gaza is really no different to what happened in the Holocaust. And I know a lot of people in the side chat listening will say, well, that's BS. But, you know, consider this has been going on for decades now, and it's now reached a point where they're literally kicking the entire population out of a piece of their occupied land. And there was a comment earlier suggesting that the West Bank and Gaza have not been occupied since 2005. Who would like to respond to that? Enver, would you like to say something about that?
Well, Gaza is a very small part of the original Palestinian land. It's a fraction of it. All those pockets of Palestinians surrounded by Jews in non-contiguous areas, they are all occupied land. The Israelis got out of some portion of the Palestinian lands, but the Palestinians didn't have any rights. They controlled them without having to occupy them and suffer the consequences of having their soldiers attacked. They just stepped back and but they gave them no rights. So, and this thing about comparing the Hitler's Germany to this is so ridiculous. In Hitler's Germany, well, perhaps I shouldn't get into that, but because there's so much over there that's debated, and I'm not an expert on that. But let me get back to this thing about Muslims and Jews. Through much of history, Muslims have been much closer to Jews than Jews have been to Christians.
Yes.
When the Muslims when the Christians reoccupied Spain that had been taken over by Muslims, the Jews and Muslims were kicked out unless they converted. I believe the term for the Jews was Moranos, pigs or something like that. And then the Jews that left, amongst them is Maimonides, who's I think the second highest person in Jewish theology. He ended up was it Egypt where he ended up? So if you look into that history, you'll find Jews and Muslims have been very close to each other. I personally, my closest friend was a Jewish couple in the condominium where I lived, right near the Pentagon. And she was always criticizing the Jews in Israel. So, Jews are not necessarily in sync with the Jews in Israel. I think Yusuf Ismail referred to these Natura Carta. I don't know if you used the word, but these are Orthodox Jews in upstate New York. I've met them in South Africa when I was there. I've met them on the mall in Washington. They are very much opposed to this behavior of the Israeli Jews in power. They don't support them. And now here's a couple of things that I was sent that I have to yet check out. That so-called concert that was going on, I have been sent a video where it's claimed that those people that were dancing at that concert were actually Israeli reservists, and many of them in uniform with their guns and everything. So I don't know what happened. I'm trying to check that out. This is just some of the stuff that, you get videos that you with no source. The other thing was, I was also referred to a video of an Israeli woman in her home with her baby. You don't see the baby, but you see the woman in her home, and she is talking to a Palestinian soldier at the time of this attack, during this attack. And the soldier is there with other soldiers, and they're going through the house to make sure there are no other military type people hanging out. But he's talking very politely to the woman. The woman doesn't seem to be under any stress. And at one point, the Hamas soldier asks the Israeli woman, he sees a bowl of bananas, he asks if he can take one.
Yeah.
And the woman says, of course. And she's describing this whole conversation to I believe, an Israeli or a Jewish journalist. And she's, if that is at all true, it puts a very different light on this whole attack.
Well, I've seen that video, and I've actually put it up on Loving Life TV. In fact, it went up this morning.
Okay.
And, because there's such a disparity in what we're being told and what witnesses are saying, that it just reflects the one great truth, and that is that during a war, propaganda rules, and you've got to be very careful about what you believe and what you don't believe. Now, what is not propaganda, and I just want to move on to this, is the fact that over 1 million Palestinians, and remember, over half of that million are children. The average age of people living in Gaza is 17 years old. 17 years old is the average age of people living in Gaza. It's the lowest average age of anywhere in the world. And that's as a direct result of the occupation of Gaza by Israel. I mean, the stress and trauma, they reckon every person in Gaza has got PTSD. Every single person from childhood. Now, just talking about this this ruling by Israel now that the Gaza or Palestinian population in Gaza have got to move out and move south. What are your comments related to that, Yusuf?
Well, I mean, this is basically an impossibility. I mean, how do you move? It's like basically, the Israelis, they claim how benevolent they are. And that, yes, they warn you in advance before they're going to bomb you. But they give you warnings for about 5 minutes. So 5 minutes, you are given 5 minutes to evacuate your particular building. And then, of course, thereafter, you bomb, you leave. You have to leave.
Hang on.
You're dead.
I just want to say something that was on mainstream media. This is not social media. And that was that the Al-Awda hospital in Gaza was given 2 hours to vacate the building with all its victims before it was going to be bombed. That was by Israel, just in the last 24 hours.
And what happens also is that there are babies on incubators.
Yes.
There are people life support. What do they have to do? They have to basically turn off their life support machine. Now, I saw an interesting interview. You know, there's Sky News Australia and there's Sky News the UK. The Sky News, I think it was Sky News UK, not Sky News Australia, which is controlled by the Murdoch family, who's another bad apple. They were interviewing the ex-Israeli Prime Minister, what's his name? I think Lapid, the one in 2011. And he was asked, what do you do about the fact, how do you justify the fact that he would drop thousands of leaflets on the northern Gaza Strip? Within 5 minutes, how are the hospital supposed to evacuate? Then he says, no, they're human shields. How dare you ask me such a question? But here's the situation. Babies are on life support. Babies are in incubators. These are real situation of babies in incubators. There are people on life support. They have to switch off the life support machine. So people are going to die. Now, when these people are dying and when they are being bombed by Israel and they're going to be killed, it's inevitable they're going to be killed. What's the response? Well, no, this is a fault of Hamas. So Hamas has to be the bogeyman. And it comes back to the whole notion of problem, reaction, solution. So coming back to your question now, that I think just yesterday, Israel has told the northern Gazan residents, about 1.1 million, that they should evacuate within 24 hours. That forced evacuation is a war crime. It's a war crime because this is the most densely populated part of the territory. It's impossible for 1.1 to 1.5 million people to leave within a small strip of road, and where they're going to go to. Because
and can I just say that small strip of road, and I showed the footage before we actually got you on, that small strip of road is blocked. The traffic is not moving. Clearly there's a problem on the road, and now you've got probably 500,000 Palestinians stuck on this road in the heat of day with children, babies. This is a humanitarian disaster. There's no water. Water was cut off soon after the invasion by the Hamas. There's no food. There's no medicine. They've been completely cut off from the outside world. Red Cross are not allowed to go in to help. They've been basically. It's like they're in this little jail, and they're bombing the jail from the top. You know, so I would just say to anyone listening to this, imagine, put yourself in that position. Okay, there you are. You've been living for decades under occupation, and yes, Michelle, they have been under occupation. The Israelis often come in with their tanks and shoot up people and do stuff in Gaza. I've seen the video footage over the years, and the Israelis control the electricity, they control the water, they control the food, they control any access that anybody has to that population. They completely control them. They're controlled. Imagine you're in that position, you're controlled, and now because there's a military group that you aren't associated with at all, okay? Just again, put yourself in this position. You have no association with Hamas. You're just someone who goes about their daily life. Now, all of a sudden, you're being told you've got to leave your home because if you stay there, you're going to die. And that's exactly what Netanyahu said. You've got 24 hours to leave there or you will die. Now, anyone listening to this, if you can put yourself in that position, I think you'll understand that there's something very wrong with what's happening. Back to you, Yusuf.
Yeah, this is basically how the Big Brother police state basically works. If you look at the Israeli leaflets that were thrown down they basically had a notice to the Palestinians: don't return to your homes until further notice from the Israeli Defense Force. And they had a clause which stated all known public shelters in Gaza City must be evacuated. So you don't have a home. But you know, when we have these floods, and we complain in these residents, if there's a flood or a storm in some of these countries, we go to these public shelters. All public shelters has to be evacuated. So you basically, there's a zombie movie called The Walking Dead, I think a series. you're basically the walking dead. You've been zombified. You've been basically eliminated. And now what's happened is that as it stands right now, the numbers already, besides asking for 1.1 million to be forcibly evacuated, you've got a situation at this particular point in time, 400,000 Gaza residents have since been displaced totally since the brutal attack by Israel on Gaza. And what is concerned to the Gazan Palestinians is that they're concerned because already at the Gaza Strip, you've got about 300,000 Israeli soldiers that have amassed outside the border of the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
Quite strangely, no security when the Hamas attacks allegedly happened, but you've already got them there. Now we are told that in the internal news reports that Palestinians themselves are afraid if they go to the border of the Gaza Strip, they will be basically shot because the Israeli Defense Force are stating they're preparing a ground assault over Gaza. So you've got a ground assault that's going to happen. You've got bombing on the top, and now you're being told to move. So you're like a little rat in a cage. That's why they call the Benjamin Netanyahu and the ex-Israeli right-wing prime minister, he's described Palestinians as rats. Because according to this fanatical worldview of them, Gentiles are goyim. They've got absolutely no right. And so coming back to Michelle, go to the root of the cause of the issue on this particular point. Do not be brainwashed systematically. See the truth for where it is. Listen to people like Scott and others who basically speak out against truth. I want to address the question that was raised to you, Scott, about, if I could,
go ahead.
On the aspect of the West Bank. Someone asked about the West Bank and what the actual situation is pertaining to the West Bank. Let me just particularly point this out. The West Bank was a place where the Palestinians fled as refugees from the place which is now Israel after the 1948 war. In the 1967 war, it was captured and occupied by Israel during the Six-Day War. Ever since the 1967 war, the West Bank, just like Gaza, has been under military occupation. What's happened since the Second Oslo Accords, which was signed in 1995, is that it nominally and superficially split about certain enclaves, Palestinian enclaves, small little containers, which were under civil administration by the Palestinian National Authority. But at this particular point in time, there are 230 Israeli settlements on the West Bank, and those settlers have the right to take your land and destroy your crops and bulldoze your house, which they are basically doing. The West Bank includes East Jerusalem, and Israel administers the West Bank under as a place called the Judea and Samaria area, and they do this under the Israeli Civil Administration Act. So the West Bank is under military occupation. Gaza is under siege. Gaza is basically on the brinks of genocide. And for anyone to deny this reality, I mean, he's a fool. That's why when I invited, and you've seen the emails, when I invited John Steenhuisen, come and give us your perspective. I'll give you more time to speak. When I invited Rabbi Warren Goldstein and the Zionist Federation, when I invited Gayton McKenzie, when I invited Robert Spencer, when I invited the Zionist Jewish Board of Deputies in South Africa, why are you so cowardly to come on a channel like Loving Life TV and debate us? Why are people afraid to talk to us? Are you scared of us? Or are you scared of the truth, of the reality of basically what's going to happen? And therefore you do not have the guts to speak to us like you speak in Parliament and shout and swear in Parliament, but you don't have the guts to come behind your screen on a computer and talk to us and give us your view. So this is the reality of the situation.
Well,
what angers me more is
ahead.
people believing falsehood. Yes.
Okay, look, I tell you what concerns me is that since this conflict has broken out, you'll notice that Saudi Arabia is now very tied up with Iran. They've become like big buddies all of a sudden. And Saudi Arabia was also talking to Israel pre this conflict. It's now coming out in very reliable sources that Saudi Arabia have broken off any discussion with Israel, and they are now in direct discussions with Iran. And the reason I'm raising this is because Hezbollah, and I hadn't realized this until this conflict broke out, but apparently Hezbollah is like an arm of the Iranian state. And they are very big in the West Bank. Now, what happens if Iran sends out a message to Hezbollah, join the war, go and attack Israel? Because then you basically have Iran involved directly in the war in Israel. Now, with what's going on at the moment in Gaza, with what appears to be a genocide in unfolding right now before our eyes, I don't think Iran's going to sit there and just say, well, it's not our problem. I can't see that happening. So what happens if the war is escalated by Hezbollah becoming directly involved against Israel?
Well, we're going to probably see more and more bloodshed. But I just want to make this point. MBS, that is the so-called de facto crown prince of Saudi Arabia, is not someone you would trust. And Saudi Arabia, the Saudi leadership, and we've spoken against this monarchy, which is essentially an illegitimate bastard monarchy that the population is dissatisfied with. They were basically on a deal. They were just prior to this, they were on the brink of a deal with the state of Israel. But what's now happened is that they are putting this deal on ice because of the fact that they see the possible involvement of Iran, and they see the fact that they themselves are sitting on a time bomb because Saudi Arabia has got a dissatisfied population. I'll tell you now that if the population had their own chance, they would overthrow the Saudi monarchy within 24 hours if they had the ability to do that. And so Saudi Arabia has recognized that. And so in light of what has happened, and in light of the fact that Israel is about to commit an open genocide, what can clearly be seen as ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians, they are going to be cautious to basically side with Israel at this particular juncture. And they're going to be cautious that if they side with Israel, they're going to be isolated in the whole scheme of things and risk coming into a possible potential confrontation with Iran. And so I think what the Saudi king is doing is attempting to mitigate his particular position because he's essentially caught out in a compromised position. I mean, let's be frank here. The Saudi regime is no saint. The Saudi regime has certainly been persecuting political dissidents and indeed religious scholars within the particular kingdom itself. And certainly the population do not like them. And if they are seen to be siding with Israel at this critical point in time, when Israel is clearly committing human rights violations, it could put them in a possible confrontation with other major powers in that region, like Iran, like possibly Syria, which is where Hezbollah comes from. And they don't want to have a situation in terms of where you then have a situation whereby Hezbollah, for example, were to enter the kingdom and engage in any kind of attacks against the Saudi regime or the apparatus of the state within the Saudi kingdom. So I think they're sitting on a tightrope, and not surprisingly, by virtue of the situation that they have faced, he's now forced to basically contact the Iranian president. And I believe they've had their first phone call, I think, on Thursday. I believe this past Thursday, I saw something, there was some report. There's just so many reports that are going on. You can't keep up with the news. Social media has got its negatives and its positives as well. But I believe that there was a call where he's basically stating that they want to prevent a broader surge of violence across the region.
Yeah.
Because this has a potential to lead, to I'm not saying it will, but it could possibly lead to a bigger war and even potentially World War III. Unlike the Ukrainian-Russian crisis, which is very much contained, but this has global implications. And as you can clearly see, there are passionate figures in different parts of the world. I'm in South Africa, you in Australia, Enver Masud is in Washington, D.C. We are passionate about the issues. So the conflict there at this particular point in time has got global ramifications and could even potentially lead to a World War III.
Well, I just want to add to that, and that is that Erdogan from Turkey, who's been traditionally a Israeli supporter, seems to now have thrown his weight behind the people of Gaza. And in the Bible, it talks about the end times, and it says that the end times will come when, I think they call it the Lion of the North, which sounds like Turkey, will come in and attack Israel. Now, everything is coming to a boiling point, isn't it, Enver?
Yes, it is. And I was trying to, while we were talking, find an item I thought I saw in the news this morning, which is that Hezbollah is ready to support Hamas if asked. I thought I saw that. I was trying to find that while we were talking. So what was your question again?
About Turkey. What, the biblical ramifications of Turkey taking on Israel.
I'm not a Bible scholar.
Yeah, but basically in the Bible it talks about, it doesn't say which country, of course, but it talks about the Lion of the North coming in and attacking Israel at the end times. And, this is a lot of people think it's actually Turkey.
I have read quite a bit about end times, and, the evangelicals here in the U.S. support Israel, but I read that the end times come when everybody except the Jews are benefit. So even those evangelicals that support them, if they believed in the full story, they themselves would be wiped out and they wouldn't benefit from that. I don't spend much time on these type of things. I try to get the hard facts first and the opinions of people who know a hell of a lot more than I do. And I try to present that at our website, twf.org. And we readily admit we're wrong if that's the case. But on all this discussion we've been having, I think we may have touched on this. The first thing is, they talk in war, the first casualty of war is truth. And we all need to be mindful of that and be searching for what is true. Second, if you familiar with Sir Peter Ustinov, who I believe is Jewish, he said, he's quoted as saying, war is the terrorism of the rich, and terrorism is the war of the poor. So terrorism is a very subjective term. Are you a terrorist or a freedom fighter? And I think Sir Peter Ustinov put it very well when he said, terrorism is the war of the poor.
Yeah, it depends on which side of the fence you are, whether you're a freedom fighter or a terrorist.
So, so many people take sides without knowing the other side. They may, if they knew the other side, may actually choose to be on the other side.
Yeah. Now look, I actually titled this live stream basically, let me just get to it. The title of his live stream is, "Who is the real terrorist, Hamas or Israel?" Now, I'm pretty sure both of you guys are going to say Israel, but clearly Hamas isn't squeaky clean. It's done some pretty nasty things too. But what is happening right now in Gaza is just unacceptable. I don't care what anyone says. It is unacceptable because it's not the Hamas fighters we're talking about. It's the babies, the children, the families who are innocent, who are being put through the most horrific genocide, and it's happening on our watch. And if we don't talk about it, then we are complicit. It's that simple.
Right. And I would go one step further. I would say it's unacceptable that we have civilian casualties on either sides, both sides.
Sure. No, I totally agree. Now, okay, Yusuf, is there something you'd like to add there? I've lost your audio.
My speaker was off. Yeah, just on that particular point, I think the one thing which is clear, which is the mainstream media is not clear and they are not honest on, is that we would condemn atrocities on all sides. And we would call, and I would call, and I believe Enver would call, that the only solution to this would be a disbandment of the state of Israel as it exists, and existing Israeli citizens and Palestinians coming together. So you no longer have Gaza and the West Bank. You have one unity government with representatives from both sides forming one particular government that is devoid of apartheid, that is devoid of discrimination, that is devoid of any kind of hate, and that is devoid of any kind of genocide that is being perpetrated by the state of Israel. Hamas, in the scheme of things, I think coming back to your question, who is the actual terrorist, Israel or Hamas? Well, those people in the chat and our viewers, our regular viewers, need to know, as I mentioned, Hamas was founded and created as a response to the PLO by Israel, by the Israeli Mossad in the 80s. People don't know this. They don't know the reality because they thought that this particular group, which was initially involved in charity, would somehow or the other oppose the PLO, which was deemed as a terrorist organization back then, and groups like the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine by George Bush. But unfortunately, it backfired. And so what you have a situation today in the context of what we are seeing playing before our eyes is that Hamas is basically the false flag. That is the issue. The issue is that Israel, to commit its act of genocide and to be viewed as still respectable in the world, cannot just go unilaterally and kill people because then the entire world will have no defense to raise for them. So they would have to say, look, we are going only against Hamas. Israel does not deliberately target civilians. We are targeting Hamas. And if children are killed, even if there are hundreds of thousands of children, or they were all human shields by Hamas, they were human shields that were basically put up by Hamas. That's why they're dying. So the babies in the incubators and the dead people who have their life support machines removed, they're also basically human shields for Hamas. This is basically the excuse that they have to have. So Hamas is a necessary excuse for genocide to happen, because without Hamas, they cannot justify the genocide. And therefore, you need this as a necessity. So the entering Israel, where the Israeli security apparatus had gone, that basically had to happen. Netanyahu had to remove his soldiers and police force and everybody. And then over and above that, you had to have babies being beheaded, which was false as we see. You had to have women being raped, which is false as we see. You have to have babies being burnt alive and their throats being slit. All of that is necessary for them to justify genocide, because then the world is going to say, well, look, how can't you support us as Israelis? We have our babies' throats being split. We're having our women raped. We have to do something. And then, of course, people will have sympathy for them. And eventually, you'd have a situation where they then support genocide.
But
this
Yusuf,
is how always.
Yusuf, I've got to say first that once people realize that's BS, it kind of undermines all the claims that have been made by Israel against, the things that they're doing. And while you were talking, I've actually Googled the stages of genocide. I want to actually put these on the record, because people need to understand when we talk about a genocide, when you listen to the stages, and the link is actually in the side chat, I've just put it there. In 1987, Gregory Stanton, a professor of law, published a paper which explored how genocides develop and unfold. In his original work, Stanton identified 8 key stages which resulted in acts of genocide. According to Stanton's model, some of the stages can happen at the same time or in a different order. In 2012, Stanton expanded on these ideas and added 2 further stages, discrimination and persecution, to make 10. According to Stanton's current model, therefore, the stages of a genocide are as follows. Now, I'm going to read these out because let's tick the box when it comes to what's happening to the Palestinians. Classification is 1. Dividing people into them and us. I think we can tick that box. Symbolization. Forcing groups to wear or be associated with symbols which identify them as different. Well, I think putting them into these places like Gaza and the West Bank does that. 3. Discrimination, excluding groups from participating in civil society, such as by excluding them from voting or certain places. In Nazi Germany, for example, Jews were not allowed to sit on certain park benches. Well, We can tick that box. Number 4, dehumanization. To deny the humanity of one group and associate them with animals or diseases in order to belittle them. Well, I've seen so many people, senior Israelis, call them subhuman, so we can tick that box. 5, organization. Training police or army units and providing them with weapons and knowledge in order to persecute a group in future. Well, we can definitely tick that box. 6, polarization. Using propaganda to polarize society, create distance and exclude a group further. We can tick that box. 7, preparation. Planning a mass murder and identifying specific victims. Well, what's happening right now in Gaza, I think we can tick that box. 8, persecution. Incarcerating groups in ghettos or concentration camps, forcibly displacing groups, expropriating property, belongings or wealth. We can tick that box. 9, this is the next stage. Committing mass murder or extermination. That's 9. We've ticked every box up to 8 right now. And then 10 is denial of any crimes. This does not necessarily mean denying that the acts of murder happened, but denying that these acts were a crime and were in fact justified. And I think once again we can tick that box because of the propaganda that's been put out. What are your thoughts about what I've just said, Yusuf?
You know, Gregory, you are so spot on. Gregory Stanton, by the way, was the founding president of Genocide Watch, and basically what he said, and as you brilliantly put it down, that the stages of genocide are so apt, they are so in par with what you've got in Israel. They're not necessarily linear, but they may occur, for example, either in a linear fashion or simultaneously. He, in fact, provided the stages of genocide to the State Department, and he also, presented it after the Cambodian genocide, the Rwandan genocide, and then, of course, he analyzed the Cambodian genocide, and other genocides that basically took place. And in all these genocides, he always put one particular key factor that was out there, that the people on whom the genocide was being committed, they were viewed as the evil. They were viewed, and the people who committing the genocide were viewed as victims. Like, for example, if you look at the Rwandan genocide, where the scholars estimate close to about 500 to 800,000 Tutsis. The Tutsis were basically exterminated, and over a period of 100 days, and of course some moderate Hutus and the Twa were killed by Hutu militias, but the Hutu militias portrayed themselves as the victims, and they said, look, these Tutsis are the evil, are the bad guys. These Tutsis are the bad guys. Like, for example, and in other genocides as well, the Cambodian genocide of Pol Pot, when, after the bombing again of that famous character, Henry Kissinger, leading up to the destruction of Cambodia and year 0, and then, of course, the introduction of Pol Pot, what was basically happening was that the indigenous population in Cambodia were viewed as evil. And Cambodia, Pol Pot was in fact communist aligned, and not surprisingly, he was backed by people like Margaret Thatcher, who she regarded Pol Pot as our freedom fighters. So in all these particular issues that you pointed out, in these kind of stages of genocide, which are a model that is used in teaching comparative genocide settings, studies in various settings, you basically have the idea that there are certain cultural conditions which are similar across the board. And so the political scientists who study this particular field, they identify certain key political characteristics of a state that statistically, correlate with risk of genocide. So, and all these particular models that basically Stanton have laid down and has basically encapsulated, and not surprised, notwithstanding the fact that he's actually the founding president of Genocide Watch, they fulfill Israel to the hilt. They fit Israel like a glove. So Israeli regime, the Israeli state, was a state founded on genocide and ethnic cleansing and mass murder. It sustained itself for 75 years through ethnic cleansing and massacre and mass murder. And now we are seeing before our very eyes in 2023, we are about to be on the verge and on the cusp of what is clearly a war crime, ethnic cleansing, and mass murder. And as I've mentioned earlier, why the Western propaganda and the Western media and the fake news isn't so in support of Israel is similar to what they did in COVID. In COVID, what did they do? They created the fear and the mass hysteria of COVID. Then they had to provide a solution, which is a vaccination. Then people have to basically live under these so-called police state. And the same thing happens here. Hamas is the bad guys. They're out to kill us. What's our solution? We have to go and target Hamas. How do we target Hamas? We destroy and obliterate the entire community of Gaza and evacuate them. And that is a solution that we basically provide. It's a kind of a Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. If people cannot see that, I mean, we've been through the worst night. I kind of joined your program during the heights of COVID. I'm glad we met up together, and we've been through a lot, and we've discussed a lot of issues.
Yeah.
If people now, after all these years, cannot see what is happening, then they need to basically systematically unbrainwash themselves from the kind of garbage and hogwash that they've been indoctrinated themselves, or self-indoctrinated themselves through the fake news and fake media, which you've been exposing for many, many years.
Yeah, well, look, I just need to pick up on that point and just make it clear to people that Loving Life TV is totally independent. Well, what I see is a wrong happening, and I saw that during COVID. I've seen so many other things with the World Economic Forum, central bank digital currencies, 15-minute cities, all these different things. We've been exposing on Loving Life TV, and I know this is a controversial subject, but what is not controversial is that there are women, children, and babies in Gaza who are dying in their thousands as a result of the overwhelming military might of Israel. It's like lambs to the slaughter. And if you look at what happened on the 7th, let's say everything Israel said was true, which we now know isn't, but let's say it was. The overreach by Israel since the 7th of October is extraordinary. And right now, you got over 1 million Palestinians who've been kicked out of their homes in North Gaza with the threat that if they stay behind, they will die. That's from the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. If you stay in northern Gaza, you will die. That's what he said. Now, that is 1.1 million, and remember, half of them are children. They're all suffering from PTSD, and why are we surprised? Look at the blanket bombing. Over 6,000 bombs have been targeted at Gaza area, and most of those at residential apartments, which has resulted in horrific injuries, horrific amounts of death, and the hospitals in Gaza are completely overwhelmed. They can't treat people. They're completely overwhelmed, and then you cut off their electricity, you cut off their water, you cut off their food. They can't run the incubators for little babies who depend on the oxygen that they're going to get through those incubators. They're dying. And yet no one is saying anything about this. If this had been Israel facing this, my gosh, this would have been, yeah, look, all I'm saying is that's why we have Loving Life TV, because we try and get things back into perspective. And I make no apology for that, because people need to know that there's always another side to the story, and that's what we're unpacking. Enver, is there something, I'm going to wrap up this live stream shortly, but is there something you'd like to say?
I think you pretty much covered it. We have lots more on our website. If you go to the home page and click on Gaza, it's about the middle of the right column. Just click on Gaza and you'll get more information that you can want all on one page.
Right. Okay.
So
Yusuf?
the website is twf.org, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, twf.
Okay. twf.org. Okay, great. Yusuf?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for bringing again attention to these kind of issues. And like I said, your live stream and your podcast goes to places where mainstream media, and you're not being paid for this. I'm not being paid for this. Neither is Enver being paid for this. But we spend our time and basically put in our effort. Unlike the mainstream fake media who are paid to give one view or the other view, we're not being paid. We give an objective. All I can say to the listeners and the viewers out there is let's pray for the people of Gaza. These are Palestinian Christians as well and Muslims. So it's not just a Muslim Jewish, it's Palestinian Christians and Muslims both having their churches and mosques destroyed and eliminated and exterminated, and are on the cusp of what could possibly be probably one of the biggest genocides we've ever seen. And clearly ethnic cleansing and war crime. Like we've said, there is a solution to this. The solution is the disbandment of the State of Israel and the Israeli regime and its leaders being charged for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But what is more important is that us as communities in South Africa and other parts of the world, we believe, since COVID, having gone through COVID, having lived under the police state, Israel is a kind of a precedent for what a global police state could look like. What's happening?
You raised that. I'm pleased you raised that because what I said in an earlier earlier video is Gaza could epitomize what a 15-minute city will be like in decades to come. In other words, the elite will control us in the same manner that the people of Gaza are being controlled by Israel. Just think about it.
That's support. George Orwell's 1984, and many people have pointed to us, and Israeli academics have pointed this out, that Israel and the position of the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank could be a blueprint for a global society where the New World Order, in fact, controls us in refugee camps. And tomorrow they will say, look, we are going to destroy your home. Let's assume we're giving you about 24 hours to evacuate the area. And if you don't go, we're going to destroy you. That is a blueprint for global fascism. That's what Israel is. It's a continuation of the Nazis because the Israelis are the Nazis. And all I can tell the people in conclusion is that if you cannot see the problem, if you cannot see what happened, I think it was the famous leader who once said that first they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then they came for the socialists, but I was not a socialist. Therefore, I did not speak out. And eventually they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. So when you see evil, when you see hatred, when you see persecution, when you see genocide and war crimes, you have a duty to speak out and galvanize your fellow citizens, because at the end of the day, we are all human. We may have different labels to us, but at the end of the day, we are all human. And if you cannot see the suffering of being, regardless of his class, color, skin, or religion, then you need to do a lot of self-introspection. And in fact, you are then part of the problem and part of the global elite that is out there to unleash this New World Order government on us and on society. And Israel is just one small portion and blueprint for this global fascist state that they want to impose on all of us.
Right. Now David Cernhammer said, sorry, Scott, you are ill-informed. Have you actually seen what Hamas did when they attacked? Did you see the footage they actually made? I'm an old fan and more than disappointed. Well, David, look, in war, atrocities are created on both sides. And if you look at the context of what this discussion has been tonight, we're talking about the wider population in Gaza, the Palestinian women, children, who've been pulled into this war, who really are no part of the war. And I would just close by making this comment. There's a photo that's doing the rounds on social media of children behind bars. I'm talking about 5, 6-year-old children behind bars. And
I've seen that.
Yeah, the comment was made that this is what Hamas are doing to Israeli children that they've taken hostage. Well, ironically, it turns out that the photo is actually of Palestinian children behind bars being held by Israelis. That's I just want to bring that up because, you know, when you look at how things are distorted, talk about disinformation, misinformation, and what we're talking about tonight is the bigger issue about, you know, what's happening in Gaza, the genocide and so on. So look, I'm going to leave it at that. I just want to say, Yusuf and Enver, thank you so much for joining me tonight. And
thank you, Scott.
Look, we'll continue to report on what's going on Loving Life TV. There's hardly any news in South Africa at the moment anyway. So, you know, I put out a video this morning which basically covered a lot of what actually happened on the 7th of October and subsequently, and some of the footage that's live raw footage of these hospitals in Gaza are just shocking beyond belief. Just shocking beyond belief. That's all I'm going to say. Alrighty. Enver, Yusuf, thank you.
Yes.
And have a great evening.
Thank you and good wishes.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. You take care. All the best.
Thanks.
Great chatting.
Thanks, Yusuf. And look, both you guys have a great festive season. We're coming up to December. It's amazing how this year has flown, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we look forward to more sessions with you.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, guys, take care.
Take care. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye for now. All right, guys, that was Yusuf Ismail and Enver, apologies, Enver Masud. As I said at the very start and during the live stream itself, we did invite members of the Jewish community to participate in this discussion. They chose not to. And look, they would have been given a totally open discussion to give their perspectives. And I know that a few people in here who disagree with me having a live stream like this, but it's not. I'm not targeting the Jewish or Israeli people. I'm targeting their government, because their government is part of the problem, the one world government, and this is the tragedy of what's happening in that region right now.